Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Hung Lahong. I actually am from Toronto, Canada. I'm glad to be here in Australia with you. I cover digital business, and I've been doing so for a very long time. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I remembered back that in 2016 at Symposium, not here in Gold Coast or even in Sydney back then, but in Barcelona in Europe, I sat down with someone like you. She was the head of digital for one of the Nordic countries. And in the one-on-one room, which you guys all have access to, we sat down and she asked me, how do I measure digital? How do I tell my leaders that we're doing better or we're doing worse? What should I strive for? How do I know that I should invest more in an area to actually do these things? And that's the premise for what we have today, that way back in 2016, today a lot of our CIOs still want to know the best practices in these areas, which is if we said we were going to be more digital, what did that mean? Is there a way of actually measuring that? And if we have an amount of money, 10 million, 50 million, we have a client in life sciences, $1.4 billion being spent on the digital journey, where are we going to put that at? What's that actually going to give us? And if we were actually given more money, what should we actually aim that at? So if we fast forward to today, we have KPIs, we have benchmarks. We've actually been benchmarking hundreds of organizations to try to understand how digital they've actually become. And that's what I'm going to take you through today. And as we do that, I want you to think about your organization and ask yourselves these same questions. Am I that digital? Do I want to be more digital? Is it worth investing in these areas? And what do these digital leaders actually do? So just to set the background, just to back up a little bit, we like to measure progress when our clients ask us, hey, Gartner, what I should be measuring. And let me actually build this out for you. We talk about three major areas. As a matter of fact, this is how we actually look at the digital journey. On the bottom in green, I think it's very easy for us to understand that, yeah, when we said that we were going to be more digital, we're going to improve in the technology areas in green. And it's not just technology, this isn't cloud or AI, as you heard this morning at the awesome keynote. It's also things like the operating model. We're going to be more agile. We're going to have product teams. So I think, especially for us in this room, we come from the technology background. We know that when we become more digital, that green is going to improve. And I'll show you how we measure that, or like to suggest to measure it at Gartner. Now, the digital journey is not just about the green. You actually do the green, the technology, for business outcomes, citizen outcomes, customer outcomes, employee outcomes. And we split that up into two main outcome categories. So on the orange side, on the left side here, we have what we call digital business optimization. And those are the kinds of outcomes that when we ask an enterprise and we say, hey, what are you planning on doing with digital? They say things like, well, we want to improve the citizen experience, or we want to reduce the cost because we're going to digitize this paper form, or we're going to automate this process. And if you think about what they're really doing there, they're not changing their business model, their public mandate if you're in public sector, but boy, can we do it better, faster, and cheaper with digital. So we call that optimization of your enterprise and your mandate. Now, other enterprises, they look at this and they say, well, of course I'm investing in the green. I've been doing so for a while, and this is, of course, one of the many next phases that we have. And of course, I owe it to my employees, I owe it to my citizens, my customers to do the orange. We do need to optimize our enterprise and our experiences for our customers. But I think that digital is more than that. I think that, and this is where I introduced the blue side on the right-hand side, we reserve the words transformation when enterprise says, well, there's more to it than that. Because of digital, we are going to move into a completely new area. We're going to build new products and services. We're going to build maybe even new digital business models. Maybe we will even build a new digital business unit. So the dark blue side is reserved for net new product, services, business models, or if you're in the public sector, your public mandate gets expanded. Well, let me just give you a few examples of that. I think easy ones in financial services, if you're building a new product or service, digital product or service, let's say a savings product for retirement, that would be the dark blue. It never existed before, but now you can, if you've seen these before, you buy a coffee for $3.40. although these days they're probably like $6.40, and if you round up to $7, you can put that towards your retirement fund. That's a new product that a lot of banks came up with. If you're in manufacturing, I sat down with the board of directors explaining the same concept, and they were in the steel industry. They make rolled steel, cables, high carbon steel sort of plates and so forth. And I asked them, well, what's your digital ambition? Are you going to do orange or blue? And they said, well, I was expecting to say, well, we're going to pursue the industrial internet, do a lot of the orange side. But then they surprised me and said, transformation side, we actually acquired an additive manufacturing, a 3D printing business, because the future of steel is not just making steel cables better, it's in other areas with digital. And if you're in the public sector, a good example, we have a case study on this. We've got a police department in Brazil. And of course, their public mandate is to catch the bad guys, if I were to simplify it. And they said, you know what? Yes, we've got better police cruisers on the orange, and we've got analytics and so forth. But what we're also doing is we're building an ecosystem. We are connecting the judiciary system, the prisons, the police systems, because to catch the bad guys, we need to become bigger than what we actually are. So that's a question of transformation. And so even if I got sick and had to leave right now, this is the basis of what forms a digital journey. And how to measure it, the benchmark, the KPIs are all based on this principle. Now, before we get into the details themselves, I'm going to bring up a point that most of our clients, when you ask them, well, tell me about your digital journey, 90% of the effort and the expected outcomes is in the orange. Digital business optimization. They're not trying to change who they are. They're just trying to create a better experience and reduce costs and these kinds of things. And 10% is on the dark blue side. And the green technology, which a lot of you are responsible for, supports that combination of 90%, 10%. So from 2016, this head of digital asking me, well, how can we measure this stuff? If we fast forward to 2021, we created what we call the Digital Execution Scorecard. And what we've done is 1,700 companies have weighed in on the question, well, how digital are you today? So that we could share with each other and say, well, I'm this digital, should I be more digital, and so forth. And what we've done is we've split them up into 3 groups, if you will. There's, of course, the foundational side, which are the less digital individuals, the mainstream, which is most of us, and then, of course, the leaders themselves. And I want to go through this and show you just how digital some of these groups are. And as I go through this, ask yourself, do I even know what we are today? So let's start with the orange side, which is about conducting business or your public mandate more digitally. So what do I mean by that? We take this concept and we split it up into these areas. What we mean is, well, are you measuring how digitally you're interacting with your customer or your citizen? Are your products and services available digitally? Are you selling through digital, what a lot of us would call digital commerce? And what about your operations? Last year, we actually showed an example of the state of Victoria here in Australia, that they were driving around the roads in sort of trucks and digital cameras and clipboards, checking to see, well, is that line, the arrow on the road, does it need to be painted? Is the stop sign bent? They were doing acquisition to make the roads safer. And then what they did is they shifted over to, and I'm sorry for not having the picture here, but like a Google-like car that just drives around, and using image recognition, they can tell that the stop sign needs to be bent, the arrow needs to be painted, and so forth. So they are conducting their operations more digitally. And then the workforce being more digital can be everything from, do the workers on the factory floor carry around an iPad, to things like, do we allow our employees to work from home? So we took these concepts and we asked them, how digital are you? And you can see some of the numbers here. So we start with some basic ones. That the first one is digital customer interaction. Are you actually sharing, if you will, interacting with your customers in a self-serve digital way? So the median organization, right in the middle of the 1,700, if you will, is 30% of our interactions are digital. What are yours? Do you know what they are? Commerce was 5%. Okay, so this is global across all industries. And if we go into the back office a little bit, fully digitized transactions, the median was 50%. So do these surprise you? Do you feel that you're ahead or behind these things? Well, the leaders, they actually start with the pink numbers on the right-hand side. That if we go to the back office, 80% of their transactions are actually digitized. Now, this is a global, all-industry perspective. You can use that. But what matters a lot is by industry. And so what we did is we did a cut. And here I'm showing government. I'll go through financial services in a second. And we looked at, well, hey, government, what's important to you? And they said, well, we told citizens that maybe we have 22 services, and, well, what percentage of those services are digitally available to citizens? The mainstream is 60%. Okay? Digital ID for authentication is at 40%, and the leader is actually much higher, at about 80%. If we go to financial services, they talk about things like underwriting. We're going to extend a credit card or a mortgage or a loan, and we ask them, well, what percentage of those things are underwritten in an automated way? It's 12%. And you can see that the numbers, of course, are bigger for the leaders at 30%. And they also care about things like customer interactions, and they tend to be a little higher than the average that's out there. By the way, these are, when you can download the slides, these numbers are in here if you'd like, but you're welcome to take pictures. And then finally, on the manufacturing side, we asked about things like, what about your workers in your factories? Or are you remotely monitoring assets, which is at 15%. Okay, and the leaders, of course, you can see are there. So what we can tell here is that we're not actually measuring the technology. Like, we're not measuring the amount of data in something or service level agreements. On the orange side, we're measuring how we conduct business or our public mandate. And that's a measurable item, and we've got a whole bunch of these. And so if I now flip over to transformation, so this is for what I said before, that some of our clients want to go beyond the industrial internet. You know, every duck in the pond is going to follow the industrial internet if you're in manufacturing. It's expected, and you can measure that, and I showed you that on the orange side. But some of our clients, they say, well, I want to be the swan. You know, I may be an oil and gas company, so I'm talking specifically, there's a company called Oxy Chemicals. They're out of Houston in Texas. And yeah, you know, we make chemicals, we extract oil out of the ground and so forth, but we want to be the Tesla of carbon credits. We want to be a carbon marketplace. That's our world in the digital future. You know, so we will be both a chemical company and a digital company. Or maybe a bank wants to be a super app of some kind, or maybe a utility company wants to create virtual power plants. Your ambitions are much bigger than what you are today. So just to show you a version of this, this is a company called Allstate. They're based out of the US, they're in insurance. They have all kinds of insurance lines, if you will. And what they did is back in 2016, they created Arity. And it's shown here on the left-hand side. I'll just simplify it for you. What they do is it's a telematics platform that plugs into a whole bunch of cars. And it gets a lot of data from that. And to the point where by 2018, they were getting 10 billion miles of driving data per month. And that data is worth money. As a matter of fact, by 2021, in their annual report, they published that they made 68 million in revenue, US dollars, for selling this data. They basically take the insight and give a risk score on drivers and fleets, which of course is very valuable information in the insurance world. Now that's a big deal. You know, Allstate is an insurance company, yet they're starting to make revenue that's actually quite substantial in the digital world. So we call that digital transformation. And I kind of did the math here when they actually published this. 68 million is a lot of money to sell data, but it's actually only 0.1% of their revenue. Okay, and so this is something else that can be measured, which is if you pursue transformation, if you said we're going to create digital products and services and revenue streams, or maybe even new businesses and business models like you saw Arity with Allstate, you told the board that we're going to generate more revenue. Well, how much more revenue did you generate? We asked 1,700 companies. And for those of them that are pursuing transformation, the dark blue, the median answer was 2% of revenue. So what I mean by that is that if you made $100 million in revenue and then you added these digital products and you started making money from that, you'd have 102. 2 million would actually come from the net new digital products and services. And then the leaders start at 8%. Okay, it sounds like it's not much, 2%, 8%. But for those of you in private sector, do the math. You know, take your revenue, even just take 2%, even take 1%, and tell me how big that is, and tell me if you can build a digital business that can produce that kind of revenue. So that's what we're talking about here as well. So to measure, you don't measure just the orange side, you can also measure the revenue impact of net new products and services. Okay, let's now go to an area that I think a lot of us are a little more comfortable with, which is the technology side. It's the same thing. We said, well, part of measuring your digital journey is not just the orange and the blue and the revenue that you're making, is how digitally advanced are you on the technology side? And we asked. So from the keynote this morning, you saw it was specifically on Gen AI, and this one number here is not just Gen AI, it's AI in general, but what percentage of your application portfolio, if you had 100 applications, how many applications actually are leveraging AI ML? It's at 5%. Okay. Cloud-based applications. Again, if you had 100 applications, it would be 30 applications. And it's not just technology, it's also what we call operating model. So agile practices, it's on 15% of the application base that's out there. This is the median organization. So this is not read as in 5% of organizations use AI ML. The number's much bigger. This is median organization uses AI ML on 5% of their portfolio. Now, in the actual digital execution scorecard, we ask about a lot of things. Okay, so I'm not going to overwhelm you with a whole bunch and dozens of metrics, but we ask areas such as cloud, right? UI adoption, APIs, in the data analytics space. Well, what percentage of your applications actually feed a data lake? It's 10% for the median organization. What about, do you have cross-channel data so that you can do multi-channel and so forth? And then things like fusion teams, what we call joint business and IT teams that are working together, and even things like products and so forth and so forth. So that is a measurement part of the digital journey. And you can take this back to your teams and ask them, hey team, how digital are we? And how much more digital do we need to do? Okay, and this is where the next section comes in, which is, if we look at this, our clients say, well, yeah, you know what, I'd like to improve in these areas. Well, very few of our clients can improve in all areas at once, because it's very expensive and actually very risky. So what would you actually pursue? What would you take the time to measure and actually invest in? So what we did is we asked these digital leaders. We took essentially the orange side, so what we call digital business optimization. We looked at who's really good from a what we call optimization perspective, such as customer experience or operational excellence. They run, with less cost in their business and they're fast and so forth. And then we took those top 25% and we asked them, what did you do on the technology side? What is it that you're better at than the rest of us? What do you think that is? Is it cloud? Is it AI? I asked the same question myself, and here's the answer. It turns out that these 4 areas are the areas that the digital leaders are a little bit better than the rest of us, if you will. And it boils down to, the first 2 are all about they're fast. They can bring, accelerate the time to value. They respond to customers in the market very, very quickly. And I'll dig into these in a moment here. And then the last 2, not so coincidentally, is the fact that they're focused on analytics and business performance, which is exactly what we're talking about today. They measure these things. They're analytics driven. They focus on these types of metrics. So to close out the presentation, let's just go through some of these. The first one is accelerated time to value. So what you can see here is that the orange are the leaders and the blue is everybody else. So orange being the top 25%. And even though we have dozens of KPIs, these 4 stood out. They have higher frequency releases. Okay, so they're just faster and they update their things a little faster than the rest of us. They have continuous delivery is another big one. They're product-centric, little more than most of us. And no surprise, the last bar on the right essentially is they have a little more agile methodologies than the rest of us. Okay, so that's something that a lot of these leaders have in common. On the customer responsiveness side, again, I don't think this is a huge surprise. One of the biggest differentiators is that we have cross-channel data. In other words, we have data that can be applied and used in any channel, from mobile to web, right, et cetera, et cetera. They use modern UI adoption practices for the UX piece. They're better at integrating, and they have a design thinking approach. If you're a little bit unfamiliar with that, it starts with, what does our customer want, right? And we design from there. So they are a lot more customer focused than the rest of us out there. So again, not a huge surprise for these kinds of things. Now,